Almost half of men don't change their bed sheets for months. And now here's a fact you won't like. People, 200,000 years ago, were cleaner than you. In an African cave, their bedding was found. Mats made of grass. And these people, who didn't have writing or art yet, regularly burned their old bedding and put down fresh bedding. 200,000 years ago, humans kept their bedrooms tidy. Now we're debating if it's okay to use the same sheet for 4 months. Hi friend, you're on the Kurkurtop channel. Today you'll learn about a forest on top of a mountain that is impossible to climb. And for some reason, there are fish swimming in the stream up there. No one understands how they got there. About a tunnel under Jerusalem that someone dug by hand. But no one knows who did it, when, or why. And about a signal from the depths of the ocean that moved at a speed unattainable by any submarine. Officially, there are no devices with such capabilities. This is the last story, and it's the strangest one. So watch the video until the end so you don't miss anything. Coffins for gods. Beneath the sands of the Egyptian desert, not far from the Pyramid of Djoser, there is an underground place called the Serapeum. The French archaeologist Auguste Mariette discovered it back in 1850, and at one time, a whole avenue of sphinxes led to it. Narrow corridors descend into the darkness, and there, in hollowed-out chambers, stand stone boxes. But these are no ordinary coffins. Each sarcophagus weighs dozens of tons. One such box weighs as much as a fully loaded railroad car, and some are even heavier. They are carved from solid pieces of granite and basalt. The interiors are polished so smoothly that even a modern engineer would be amazed. And the thick lid fits the box with a precision that's hard to achieve even today. And they didn't bury pharaohs in them. Bulls were laid in these coffins. In ancient Memphis, priests selected a single bull, declaring him the living embodiment of a god. While he lived, the bull was revered as sacred, and when he died, his body was mummified and placed in these giant sarcophagi with honors that not every person received. And so it went on, century after century, from the time of Pharaoh Amenhotep III and almost up to the Roman era. Now think about this. To carve such a box from solid granite, polish it from the inside, drag dozens of tons of stone through narrow underground corridors, and lower it precisely into place, you need a quarry, transportation, engineering calculations, and hundreds of people. And all this for a bull. Some researchers still seriously talk about some kind of lost technology. They say it couldn't have been done by hand. Egyptologists simplify everything as much as possible and claim that there's no magic involved. Only abrasives, levers, copper tools, and years of painstaking work. Maybe that's true, but just imagine it yourself. You need to carve a box and a lid weighing dozens of tons out of solid rock, polish the inside surface to a mirror finish, lower everything underground through a corridor a person can barely squeeze through, and place the lid so that there's no gap at all, without a crane, without an angle grinder, without a laser level. When you stand next to such a 40-ton box that someone dragged in here more than 2,000 years ago for the sake of a sacred bull, the theory about primitive levers somehow doesn't sound convincing. And there's another odd thing. Many sarcophagi were found empty. There were no bulls inside. Either they were looted in ancient times, or maybe they weren't meant for that in the first place. Scientists and historians are still debating this. Currently, 9 buried bulls are known, and according to Mariette's own accounts, 3 more have not been found to this day. The scariest thing is that thousands of years ago, this was a civilization far more advanced than ours today, and yet it was destroyed. What really happened back then, we may never know. A ring with someone else's name. England, Lincolnshire. A man with a metal detector is walking through a field. The device detects something. He digs and pulls out a silver ring with gilding from the ground, which, as it was later discovered, had been lying in the earth for 1,000 years. A little over 2 centimeters in diameter, 4.5 grams. And along the edge, 16 runic symbols are engraved. And this is where things start to get strange. There is gilding on the ring everywhere except on the runes themselves. This means the inscription was made after the ring was crafted. Someone took a finished piece of jewelry and then separately scratched runes onto it. And in the grooves, they rubbed in a dark inlay so the symbols would be visible. Scientists from Nottingham University have deciphered part of the inscription. It may contain the encrypted name Udnan and a word similar to ancient ring, but no one still understands the exact meaning. Runes are the script of the Germanic peoples before the Latin alphabet arrived, but they weren't always used for writing in the way we understand it. Often, these were symbols with a special meaning: protective, ritual, and magical. Similar rings with the same unreadable inscriptions have been found before, and now they are kept in the British Museum. The meaning of these inscriptions remains undeciphered, leading researchers to seriously believe they may have been amulets. You're wearing not just a piece of jewelry on your finger, but a spell that's meant to protect you. The ring is finely and carefully crafted. Archaeologists have called it one of the most remarkable finds of its kind. It likely belonged to someone wealthy. At the same site, they also found an Anglo-Saxon buckle, so there was an entire settlement here that no one knew about before. And people who knew how to write lived there. In the era that's called the Dark Ages, when only a few people could read, one wore a ring with a secret inscription. Its meaning remains unknown after 1,000 years. Scarabs in the setting. In one of the episodes of the show Pawn Stars, where people bring all sorts of rarities to the pawn shop, there was a story that perfectly shows how the price of antiquities really works. A woman brought in a gold ring with an ancient Egyptian scarab set into it, the sacred beetle that Egyptians made by the thousands as amulets. According to family legend, the ring is more than 3,500 years old, from the time of the 18th dynasty, the same one that included Tutankhamun and Nefertiti. The woman expected to get $15,000 for such an item. They called in an expert, and that's when things got interesting. The expert takes the ring, looks at the scarab. Yes, he says, the beetle is real. This is an authentic ancient Egyptian artifact. But then he shifts his gaze to the setting, to the gold, and everything falls apart. The weaving, the technique, the style of work, all of this does not point to ancient Egypt. Instead, it points to the early 20th century, around the year 1900. What does that mean? In those years, there was a real craze for Egypt in Europe and America. Everyone was obsessed with pharaohs and tombs, and enterprising people set up an entire business around it. They took real ancient scarabs, which were found in the Egyptian sand by the handful. They set them into brand new gold rings and sold them to tourists as ancient relics. So the beetle is ancient, but the ring is just a regular souvenir from the country, about 100 years old. And the price was set accordingly. The expert valued the scarab itself at about $200 to $250. The gold was another $200. Instead of $15,000, the woman left with $300 to $360. And here's the main lesson in all this. In archaeology, context is everything. An ancient object, pulled out of its original setting, from the tomb and the layer of earth, from the history that comes with it, and placed in a modern setting, ceases to be a museum treasure. It just turns into a vintage piece of jewelry with a cute beetle. The beetle itself hasn't changed a bit over time. Everything around it has changed. I'm amazed that a genuine artifact from ancient Egypt, more than 3,000 years old, is being sold for such a small amount of money. I would just keep it for myself out of interest. And I don't care that the gold frame is a modern addition. 37 corpses in one jar. Northern Laos, the mountain forests on the Jingkuang Plateau. There's a place there called the Plain of Jars. Hundreds of giant stone vessels are scattered throughout the valley, and most of them are empty. For a long time, scientists couldn't understand what they were for. Then, an international team opened one of the jars, which they called Object 75. It was as tall as a person and more than 2 meters wide. Imagine a stone vessel the size of a small car standing upright. And it wasn't empty. Inside were the remains of 37 people. Radiocarbon dating revealed an even stranger fact. The jar was used for 270 years. That means people kept coming back here again and again, generation after generation. And they kept placing their deceased in the same vessel. Grandfathers, fathers, children, all in one jar. This happened roughly from the 9th to the 12th century AD. At that time, the Chinese Song dynasty and the Khmer Empire in Cambodia were flourishing nearby. But the bones weren't placed there immediately after death. It turned out that this was done in 2 stages. First, the body was left to decompose. Only after that were the individual bones placed in the jar. The small jars nearby most likely served as a temporary place where the body finished decomposing. And when only the bones were left, they were moved to join the others. Perhaps that's why most of the jars on the plain are empty. They weren't graves, but rather staging points. As one of the excavation leaders said, in many cultures, decomposition is a transitional phase between death and the world of the ancestors, and moving the bones meant that the transformation was complete. I wonder who these 37 people were. Relatives, one community? No one knows yet. Beads were found nearby, and analysis showed that the material was brought all the way from South India and Mesopotamia. So this place was connected to trade routes across half of Asia, and even today, it's hard to get there. Dense forest, mountains, and unexploded bombs left over from the Vietnam War. Who do you think these 37 people in one jar were? One family? Or something completely different? Write your thoughts in the comments. I'd be interested to read your theories. A forest that shouldn't exist. And here's a story that wasn't discovered during expeditions, but on Google Maps. A biologist was looking at satellite images from northern Mozambique and saw a dark spot among the dry savanna. It was as if someone had taken a piece of jungle and stuck it onto a chunk of rock. This is Mount Lico, a huge stone pillar in the middle of the plain, with walls over 700 meters high. That's twice as tall as the Eiffel Tower, and the walls are almost vertical. The mountain itself is an island of solid volcanic rock which erodes much more slowly than everything around it. Once it was part of a single massif. Everything else has disappeared, but Lico still stands. An ordinary person can't climb it. On top is a forest isolated from the world for millions of years. No one has ever touched it. Scientists went up there with climbers, and questions arose. The first mystery is the silence. An African forest usually screams, whistles, and sings with all kinds of voices, but here, there were almost no birds. There are no physical obstacles for them. There's plenty of food, but birds just don't fly there, and no one understands why. The second mystery: since there are no birds, small creatures have multiplied. Spiders, caterpillars, new butterflies, unknown to science, and rats the size of a cat. The third mystery is the soil. They expected a thin layer of soil on bare rock, but they found deep soil where large trees grow. That means the forest here is not hundreds, but at least thousands of years old. Organic matter built up for thousands of years. Then, in a mountain stream at the summit, they saw a catfish. A large, living fish. At the top, there are inaccessible cliffs. How did it get there, you might ask? It's impossible to answer that question for sure right now. Maybe birds once carried its eggs there? Maybe it's a trace of an ancient water system that no longer exists? We don't know the exact answer. And finally, near the stream, they found old clay pots. Someone left them there. But in ancient times, climbing this mountain without mountaineering equipment was simply impossible. No way. Who brought the pots there, when, and how? That's the fourth mystery. And for now, it remains unanswered. 4 mysteries on one mountain and no answers. How do you think the fish and pots got to the summit where no one can climb? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to gather different theories. I think that some billionaire, after learning about this hard-to-reach place, would say, yes, this is exactly the place I've been looking for. I'll take it for myself. A saint instead of a king. Norfolk, England. Another metal detectorist, this time near the village of Dunton, and this time a 9th century gold coin pendant. On one side, a bearded face in profile, and by the Latin inscription it was identified this is John the Baptist. And on the reverse, a fragment of text has survived, which was interpreted as Baptist and Evangelist. And that's almost impossible. The thing is, in that era, during the time of the Carolingians, coins in Western Europe depicted rulers, kings, emperors, those who held power, not saints. But here, on gold, there's a religious figure. The coin expert said directly that not a single other Carolingian coin with John the Baptist is known. Not a single one at all. Such images were common in Byzantium on the other side of Europe, but not here. It gets even worse. The script points to the end of the 9th century, around the 860s to the 870s, and right around 870, eastern England was captured by the Vikings. And at that time, the Vikings were not really Christians yet. So how did a gold coin with a Christian saint in the Byzantine style end up in the lands of the pagan Vikings? It turns out that there was much more interaction between the Vikings and Christians than historians used to think. We are used to picturing the Vikings as pagans who came to burn down monasteries. But it turns out that ideas, symbols, and faith crossed cultural boundaries much more easily than previously thought. And someone in the Viking lands wore gold with a Christian saint around their neck. One small coin will cast doubt on an entire chapter of the textbook. Right now, it is undergoing examination under British treasure law, and the museum in Norwich already has its eye on it. Amulet. Omelette is 7,000 years old. A short but tasty story. You'll like it. In the south of Israel, not far from Nitzana, archaeologists uncovered a stash of eggs that are 7,000 years old, and nearby, the remains of a hearth. The picture comes together on its own. Ancient desert nomads gathered eggs, made a fire, and cooked them right on the spot. One egg was literally lying inside the hearth. The setup shows this isn't a natural clutch left by a bird, but a purposely collected stash. Scientists have basically found an ancient breakfast site, an omelet that's 7,000 years old. And these weren't chicken eggs. One ostrich egg is about as nutritious as 20 regular ones. So just one was enough to feed an entire group. No wonder eggs were so highly valued. Strong shells were used to make water flasks, placed in graves, and used as luxury items. But interestingly, archaeologists often find eggs. Ostrich bones, however, are almost never found. Apparently, ancient people decided, why kill an ostrich if you can just collect its eggs? They didn't touch the bird, only took the clutches. In essence, they were taking care of future harvests long before people even started thinking about such things. By the way, ostriches themselves lived in these areas until the 19th century, until they were completely exterminated. And the eggs were preserved thanks to the desert. The sand covered the site and preserved it. And after 7,000 years, the dunes exposed it again. A tunnel to nowhere. Before building a new district in Jerusalem, archaeologists surveyed the area to see if anything ancient was underground. It was a routine, almost daily job until they fell through. Literally, they stumbled upon a natural void in the rock, and it turned out to be the entrance to a long underground tunnel. The tunnel stretches for more than 50 meters. The height is about 5 meters. In some places, the width reaches up to 3 meters. This is not just a natural crack. You can walk through it standing upright. Part of it has collapsed, and some is filled with soil that has built up over centuries. Most importantly, scientists are certain this is not a natural formation. The tunnel was dug by hand. And again, archaeologists and historians have many questions. Who made it, when, and why? No one knows. At first, they thought it was an ancient aqueduct leading to a spring. They found no nearby water sources, and the walls aren't plastered. That's not how you build for water, or it would seep into the rock. Later, another theory appeared, that it's a mine, dug for the chalk layer, for building stone or for lime. But that's just a version too. There's no evidence. It's also impossible to determine its age. They didn't find a single item inside that could be used for dating. Not a shard, not a coin, nothing. There's only one clue so far. Nearby, there are ruins of an Iron Age settlement. If the tunnel was dug back then, it means it's 2,500 to 3,000 years old. Just imagine that. Someone carved a passage in the rock as long as half a football field and as tall as 1.5 times a person's height. They moved tons of rock by hand. They spent months, maybe even years on this. And then this passage was forgotten so thoroughly that thousands of years later, we stumbled upon it by accident. And we still don't know what it was for. An entire structure without a single clue about who built it or why. A find from the toilet? Paderborn, Germany. Archaeologists were digging at a construction site and uncovered a medieval toilet, a cesspit that was sealed almost 800 years ago. They found 5 such sealed pits there at once. It doesn't sound very appetizing, but thanks to this, an amazing thing has reached us. At first, it was mistaken for a lump of dirt, but when they cleaned it in the lab, it turned out to be a small wooden notebook about the size of a palm, 10 pages, covered with wax, in a leather case with a lily pattern. And in the Middle Ages, the lily was a symbol of royal power. They wrote on the wax with a stylus. You could scratch a note, erase it, and write again. A medieval notebook for drafts. Without oxygen in the sealed pit, wood, wax, leather, and even fabric survived for centuries without rotting. In normal soil, nothing would have remained. The restorer claims that even after so many centuries, the find from the cesspit still smelled decent. The pages have Latin cursive. In some places, the lines overlap each other, as if they were written in different directions. so deciphering it will take time. But scientists think that the book belonged to a merchant. At that time, only a few people could read and write, and merchants were part of that literate elite. Most likely, deals and daily business were recorded in the notebook, something like a medieval planner. And nearby in the same pit, they found barrels, baskets, ceramics, a knife, and scraps of silk. Expensive fabric, cut into neat strips. Why were there strips of silk in the toilet? That's an interesting question. The restorers suggested exactly what you were already thinking. A long time ago, elegant silk fabric was thrown away, and it was used as toilet paper. 80 years ago, someone wiped themselves with silk. Expensive and luxurious, that's clear. But from a practical point of view, I would argue with that. A set on fabric, 1,100 years old. Saudi Arabia, the archaeological site of Daria, in the Al-Qasim region. More than 100 gold ornaments over 1,100 years old were found in the ground. They look as if they were just removed yesterday and dusted with sand. Pendants, gold discs, colorful beads, and a large disc-shaped ornament encrusted with colored stones around a central pattern. The scientist believes that all of this was once a single luxurious set of jewelry, which was worn on major holidays and special occasions. Floral patterns within geometric ornaments are the signature style of Islamic art from the Abbasid era. That very caliphate, which was famous for science, literature, luxury, and trade across half the world, everything was made very meticulously. The craftsmen hammered out the thinnest sheets from gold and pressed patterns into the metal. They carefully set colorful stones into the settings, and the stones themselves were apparently brought from afar, meaning trade links reached this place from 1,000 kilometers away. It is unknown who the gold belonged to. Maybe a wealthy family, maybe merchants, or maybe a pilgrim. The Basran Hajj route passed nearby, the road along which people traveled to Mecca from Iraq. Picture a caravan 1,000 years ago camping near this city en route to the holy sites, with one traveler carrying a full set of gold jewelry. And around it, they found not only jewelry, but an entire settlement, a stone foundation and walls made of clay bricks, and plastered rooms, hearths, ovens, shards of glass, and ceramics. So this was not a temporary camp and not a treasure buried in an open field. It was a living city, a city of the ages. Faith, trade, and gold flowed through it. This once again proves that the desert trade routes of that era were lively and wealthy arteries, not just roads through the sand. Thousands of eyes on the ground. In the 1930s, the Atlantic coast of the United States was photographed from an airplane for the first time, and people were left breathless. The entire coastline from New Jersey to Florida was dotted with thousands of oval depressions, resembling lunar craters, as if the Earth is looking at you with thousands of identical eyes, and all these eyes are squinting in the same direction, because the long axes of these ovals are oriented strictly from northwest to southeast. Thousands of depressions along hundreds of kilometers of coastline. Also, the farther north you go, the bigger the turn. In Georgia, the angles are one way. In Virginia, they're different. And if you mentally extend all these axes, they converge at roughly the same point, somewhere in the area of southeastern Indiana and southwestern Ohio. They called them the Carolina Bays, although they're not actually bays at all. Where they came from is still debated. The first theory is an attractive one. A swarm of meteorites struck the Earth, perfect oval shapes, a unified orientation, and it would seem that everything fits. Modern instruments disprove this theory. The depressions are too shallow for craters, and no meteorite fragments or impact traces have been found. The second theory is more Hollywood-like. A comet crashed into a glacier above the Great Lakes. It threw chunks of ice into the sky, and they fell like hail onto the softened coastal ground, creating slanted dents. And that's exactly why all the axes point toward the Great Lakes. The third theory is boring, but it's the most popular among scientists. During the Ice Age, there were constant hurricane-force winds. Currents swirled in the shallow lakes, and for thousands of years, the water carved the shores into a perfect oval. The wind always blew in one direction. That's why the eyes all look the same way. But none of the theories fully explain this anomaly. Meanwhile, scientists keep arguing, and the bays themselves have turned into protected oases. Only here, in the wild, within 100 kilometers around the one and only city, grows the legendary Venus flytrap, a plant that eats insects because the soil around it is too poor, carnivorous flowers in the mysterious eyes of the planet. And also here, in the still water without fish, the rarest frogs breed peacefully. And now what is happening to them right now? In 2026, there used to be up to 500,000 of such bays. Today, only a few hundred remain. The rest have been consumed by fields, clearings, and construction. One large bay during the war, and one was even turned into a bombing range. And after a recent court decision, many of them lost their state protection. And the unique eyes of the earth could simply be turned into farmland. A cosmic strike or the magic of the wind? Whose side are you on? Write in the comments. The knight who never existed. Barcelona, Pedralbes Monastery. For the 700th anniversary of the monastery, archaeologists opened several tombs from the 14th century. They wanted to learn more about the life of the first women's community, and among these tombs was the grave of Queen Elisenda de Moncada. This woman, at the age of 30, married the 50-year-old King Aragona. She became his fourth wife and stepmother to his 10 children, and one of the most powerful queens of medieval Europe. After being widowed, she founded this monastery and lived there until the age of 70, by the way. This was confirmed. There are signs of age-related osteoarthritis on them. Everything matches the story. She herself was buried modestly in monastic clothing, in a simple wooden box. But traces of gold-embroidered silk and fragrant herbs were found in the tomb, rosemary and myrtle. So far, everything is normal. But then comes something that science cannot explain. In the tomb of the monastery's first abbess, a hole was found in the skull, a knife wound. In another grave, where records said a knight was buried, there were no male bones found. Instead of a knight, there were 2 adult women and 3 children. And in the third tomb, there were the bones of at least 9 people buried at different times. Among them were 4 male skulls with stab wounds, and the mummified torso of a pregnant woman with the remains of an unborn child inside. Let's go over it again to take it all in. The abbess of the convent with a stab wound in her skull, 4 men stabbed to death within the walls of the convent, where there shouldn't have been any men at all, a pregnant woman with a baby, right next to the tomb of the queen herself. This isn't an ancient battlefield or an untouched cemetery. This is a quiet convent that the queen founded for prayer. And no one can still answer who these people were, how they got here, or why they were killed. Now, DNA is being extracted from their bones and teeth to try to understand who these people were. Were they related, and did they carry traces of ancient diseases? Maybe the answer will be found. Or maybe the mystery of the quiet convent will remain a secret forever. Someone else's property in someone else's hands. And now, a story not about what was found, but about what lies where it shouldn't. There are things kept in the most famous museums in the world, but half the planet believes they don't belong there. A book called Jigji. This is the oldest book in the world, printed with movable type in 1377. That's 78 years earlier than the famous Gutenberg Bible. That means Koreans mastered printing almost 100 years before Europeans. UNESCO has recognized it as a monument of global significance. It is currently kept in the National Library of France, where it was taken by a French diplomat back in the early 20th century. Korea is asking for it to be returned. France refuses, explaining that the book is a treasure of all humanity. The bust of Queen Nefertiti, the limestone face, is almost 3,500 years old, and this is one of the most recognizable images in history. It has been kept in Berlin since 1913. Egypt has been asking for it to be returned home for decades, and for decades they have been refused. The Koh-i-Noor diamond, 105 carats. Since the 19th century, it has adorned the crowns of the British monarchy. It came to Britain after the capture of the Sikh Empire, India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. 4 countries at once want it back. Britain is not going to return it. And the most daring story, the gold of Troy, the so-called treasure of Priam. It was excavated in Turkey by the archaeologist Schliemann in 1873, and he secretly took it out of the Ottoman Empire. During World War II, the gold was hidden in Germany, and then it ended up in the USSR. Today, the treasures of Troy are kept in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, and Russia considers them its own. An ancient book, an ancient face, an ancient stone, and ancient gold, excavated in one country, displayed in another. And the dispute over who really owns them has lasted longer than some countries have existed. Something down below. And here is the last story, the strangest one. It's not about ancient times, it's about what's happening right now while you're watching this video. Over the past 10 years, more than 3,000 autonomous devices have been launched into the oceans. Small things about the size of a backpack. They measure salinity and temperature. Others listen. They catch sounds and signals in the water column and decide on their own whether it's a natural noise or man-made. It works like a database. If such a signal has already been encountered, the device recognizes it. If not, it marks it as new and sends it for analysis. In June 2023, one such sensor in the Pacific Ocean picked up a powerful man-made signal at a depth of about 3,600 meters. The signal lasted for about 70 minutes, and then the source started going even deeper and disappeared. A few months later, the same thing happened in the Atlantic. There, several devices detected the signal at the same time. And now, the reason for the whole story. The speed of the source was about 370 kilometers per hour underwater, at a depth of more than 3 kilometers. That's faster than most submarines can go even on the surface, and much deeper than they can operate at all. To move like that in dense water at such a depth, you need enormous power and a special hull. Officially, there are no vehicles with such characteristics. Scientists started to take an interest. Could it be military tests? Then there would have been satellites nearby, escort ships, warnings for vessels, but there was nothing. Maybe it's nature? Then the signal would have been picked up by seismic stations, but they're silent. Maybe it's just a glitch in the equipment? But 2 devices in the Pacific Ocean showed the same thing, and in the Atlantic, several did at once. The most rational explanation is a secret test of some next-generation deep-sea vehicles, the kind that people just don't talk about openly. Developments in the field of ultra-fast underwater movement are indeed underway in several countries. Technology has advanced a lot, and what is shown to the public usually lags behind real developments by years. However, the officially stated depths and speeds of such vehicles are noticeably lower than what the sensors recorded. So this version doesn't explain everything either. But the official story was never clarified, and the question remains unanswered. The ocean is shared, it's international, and someone is racing there at 370 kilometers per hour at depth, where, according to all textbooks, there shouldn't be anything at all. And this isn't a legend or a story passed down through many people. This happened 3 years ago, and the instrument recorded everything down to the second. Someone goes down there where it's dark, cold, and the pressure is like 1,000 atmospheres, moves in a way that no one else on the planet can, and calmly goes even deeper. Classified tests or a rare malfunction of complex equipment? What do you think? Write in the comments. And here's what grabs your attention the most in all of this. We're used to thinking that everything about the past is already known. Textbooks are written. Museums are filled with all kinds of exhibits. All the tombs have already been opened. And then one coin, one book, one signal from the darkness of the ocean, and it turns out we know almost nothing. Every year, the past throws at us something that shouldn't exist. And the most interesting part is when science honestly says, we don't understand yet. Subscribe and turn on notifications. A new video is coming soon.